So there's so many people that we study with that they learn and they finally accept the Sabbath. It's as a biblical truth because it's so obvious in the Bible. And then they hear something about a calendar change, and then immediately their mind says, hey, we lost track of time. There's no way we can know what day the Sabbath is. So it's kind of futile to sort of pick a day. So if you do pick the wrong day, it's not your fault.
Okay.
And so that's kind of what we'll study today. And we'll find out from our studies that that's not the case. God has pinpointed for us through a number of reasons. We'll show some reasons here.
All right. Well, let's dive into
it. All right. So questions. So when we're dealing with questions, just recently there was a fella named Charles, 91 years old, and poor guy, he has Parkinson's. He said he has Lyme's disease, and he just watched the Seventh-day Beavers, the documentary that airs on Better Life TV, about the animals that rest on Saturday. And he goes, okay, well, that was interesting. He called in and said, that was interesting, but there's no way we can know what day the Sabbath is because the calendar was changed and we've lost track of time. Mm-hmm. I said, Charles, you're absolutely right. The calendar has been changed, but you're wrong about us losing track of time. I said, we have evidence, we have scientific evidence from a number of sources, and we'll talk about 3 of those today.
Okay.
And so let's talk about those 3 evidences. Evidence number 1, are we ready for that?
Let's do it.
Evidence number 1, and this is scientific. The word is circumception. I don't know if you've ever heard that word before. But
no, I don't think I have.
It's kind of a new word. It was hard for me to learn how to pronounce it.
I think of, circadian rhythms and things like that. Circadium.
Okay. Circadium, so you're familiar with that one. Circa means about in time. Mm-hmm. Cadium means a day. So about 1 day rhythms. So if you talk about a circadian rhythm, you're talking about like when you get hungry at a certain time every day. It's because there's a biological clock in your stomach and in your duodenum and all the different. In fact, every organ of the body has a biological clock now. They're studying that. So every day you get hungry at the same time, and if you're eating healthy, you are regular in the bathroom and those kind of things. You get sleepy at the same time. Those are circadian rhythms.
Okay.
But so scientists have been studying, researchers have been studying circumception rhythms, and the word circa, of course, again, about in time. Septon, sept means 7.
Okay.
7-day biological rhythms. So they've been studying 7-day biorhythms now and finding out that these are innate in almost all creation, and in fact even plants too. And so lots of studies going on now. In fact, if you go back in history, you'll find out the guy that we call the father of chronobiology, which is studying rhythms innate in human beings and in all living creatures. His name is Franz Halberg.
Okay.
Franz Halberg. Franz Halberg, let's see, we have him in here. Franz Halberg is what we call him the father of chronobiology. So he first became alert to circumception rhythms when he noticed that his patients that he researched that got pneumonia, they either died or got well in exactly 7 days. So he noticed a pattern developing. And so he started a research committee and started doing research, and he found out that there's a number of biological functions that were also circadian or circumception. They go up, peak out, like blood pressure, respiration. Let's see, blood pressure, body temperature, hormone levels, acid content in the blood, red blood cell count, all in circumception rhythms. Oral temperature, and many other functions, including like the common cold.
Okay.
And we don't really notice those. We notice our circadian rhythms, but we don't really notice our 7-day biorhythms too much. Of course, I started noticing them though because of the study I did with the beavers.
You start paying attention to it.
I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Why don't they come out on Saturday? I always thought it was a coincidence, but it happened for 16 years.
Wow.
And so that study really is another evidence of a circumception rhythm. And many other studies, I think maybe I shared on the documentary about a neuroscientist who was studying how fast the neurons grow in mouse brains. They're just measuring the growth rate. On Friday night sundown in Texas, Friday night sundown through Saturday night sundown, those are the Sabbath hours, the biblical Sabbath hours, the growth rate accelerated measurably, and she documented this, and then it went back to normal on Saturday night at sundown and was consistent all the way through Friday night at sundown, and it would accelerate. That's a mouse. I mean, it's one thing for a human to have maybe a circumception rhythm because God maybe, He wants us to have a certain bodily function in order to communicate with Him on Sabbath. His Sabbath hours are for communion with God and rest.
Interesting, and it extends to the animal kingdom,
into the animals,
the plant kingdom, and everything.
Yeah.
Wow.
The science on the plants is so hard. It's above my head. But I've got the websites, I've got the documentation, the research, and the language is scientific, and it's just fascinating. These are 7-day biorhythms in just about every creation.
Right. So we will put some of those resources up for the viewers.
Hopefully, yes, that'll be good. Yeah, every organ, and people, I'm from Loma Linda University. I've studied there and graduated there, but there's doctors that are studying these circumception rhythms in Loma Linda. And they're talking about the biological clocks and everything, and every one of your organs, a biological clock. And so we would consider that. And I told Charles this. I'm telling Charles all about this. This is evidence number one, scientific evidence number one, that we haven't lost track of the calendar. So we talk about 7-day biorhythms, but what's interesting is when the animal studies, why is the 7th-day rhythm always on a Sabbath? That's the biblical. Why is it Saturday?
Right.
It always is.
Interesting.
And that's amazing.
So that's evidence number one. So how does evidence number two tie in?
Now, evidence number two, maybe you have never heard of this, but evidence number two is what we call, and what science calls, the Jewish diaspora.
Okay.
And so from the word diaspora, you can get the word dispersion. This is a study of an ancient culture of people who have been displaced from their ancestral homeland many, many times.
Yes.
They've been displaced and dispersion. They've been dispersed all over the world in almost every country, pretty much every country of the world. And so the Jewish diaspora is a study of this dispersion and how this culture retains their culture in hundreds of countries around the world. They still maintain their culture. And the main thing that they retain is the Sabbath day. So I call our Jews that are dispersed around the world, I call them our world's timekeepers.
Our timekeepers, yeah.
Yeah, they keep track of 7-day. They internationally recognize which day the Sabbath is as a group. It's just like they're like the beavers or something. They know when the Sabbath is, but they actually scientifically keep track of it.
Right.
So we have so one researcher is a Jewish man named Rabbi Menachem Posner. Rabbi Menachem Posner, and he got the exact same question, and I found his research on it. And it's not research that he had to just also produce to answer the question. It's stuff he does. This is what he does.
Right.
The question was exactly like what Charles asked me. Well, since the calendar was changed, we don't know what day the Sabbath is. Well, he's ready for this with the Jewish diaspora answer. He answers Charles' question by citing a volume of research called the Midrash Rabbah. Maybe some of our viewers have maybe heard of it. I have never heard of it before him. But the Midrash Rabbah is it's a 10-volume encyclopedia type set of research that shows that was started by a committee all the way back in the time when the Israelites were in the Exodus from Egypt, and they were receiving manna.
Okay.
From the time they received manna, a rhythm was established for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Before that, the rhythm was there, but they were unaccustomed to it. So God is reacquainting them to the rhythm.
Right.
6 days, manna falls. The 7th day, what happens?
No manna.
No manna.
Collect extra. Yeah.
So it's nice that manna falls. That's pretty significant. But even more significant was that manna didn't fall on the 7th day. So that really distinguishes that one day. That day was Saturday, or what we call Saturday, or the Sabbath day, the 7th day of the week. And so from that time on, the Midrash Rabbah, the Midrash Rabbah is really a commentary on the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible.
Okay.
Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Genesis. So here To quote Rabbi Menachem, he said, "Your very question was dealt with by the Midrash Rabbah, a compilation close to 2,000 years old, which shows that since the Hebrews received manna from heaven, he said, have continued to keep count." Can you imagine that? It's kind of like you've heard of these Aborigine tribes or some of the jungle people that when they learn about the Sabbath, then they start keeping count because they don't have computers, they don't have iPhones, so they start tying knots. I've heard about one group that would tie knots, and they would mark 6 days and then tie a knot for the 7th day so they could keep track. So they've continued to keep count and will continue to do so for the rest of time, says Rabbi Menachem Posner.
Right.
So that's the Jewish diaspora. There's a group have been keeping track, and they tell us that the Sabbath, the Saturday that we have today, all around the world, internationally, corresponds precisely with the Sabbath back in the time of the Exodus.
Right.
We haven't lost any track of time.
So now you have historical documentation that you can refer to,
Yes.
and then you also now have these rhythms.
Have the rhythms,
that we're talking about. So now you have two evidences that support one another.
Exactly.
And as if that's not enough, there's a third one.
There's a third one. Yes, that's right. And this is This is a little bit more scientific. So back to the Midrash Rabbah. The Midrash Rabbah's goal was to keep track of the 7th day, God's 7th day. That's their goal. They're like a committee. I think God appointed them. Do you think?
Yeah, and you look at the history of the Jews. I mean, they were you read your Bible and learn about the Pharisees and learn. I mean, it was very regimented. There was no room for error.
There's nobody that studies Scripture more than the Jewish people, the Jewish scholars. I mean, we think in our church we do have probably the second best scholars in the world. I would say, well, up there with us and maybe even higher are the Jewish rabbis and scholars that study their Scripture. I mean, there's people that memorize the whole Torah.
Right.
And so
something that's been handed down generation by generation and documented.
And carefully documented.
Right.
They're very careful with all this. So you're ready for our third evidence?
I'm ready for the third.
Okay, third evidence.
Now we're really getting in. This is still 101, right? It's still understandable.
Oh yeah. Well, if it's coming from me, it's going to be understandable because I'm not deep in science too much. But so the third one is what everybody calls the Naval Observatory. You've heard of the Naval Observatory in Washington D.C.?
Okay.
It's this big white building. It looks like the White House, but it's a big dome. And from that building, time is synchronized for the entire planet. That's where it happens, right? There's other observatories, but this is the main one. This is Grand Central, right there, the Naval Observatory. And people who work there are astronomers that are chronologists. These are the specialists in chronology, are astronomers. So what's really interesting to learn is that how time is synchronized. It's done by the stars. God set the stars. In Genesis 1 and verse 14, it's even there in the Bible, right in the beginning of the Bible, the first chapter. God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament and of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, for seasons, for days, and for years." So God has placed those lights, which are stars, in the heavens, and He's fixed them in place. And those, you can count on those. I'm not sure to the micro inch or whatever, but those things are fixed. God put them there, and we can rely on them. That's why people on the ocean that are navigating by the stars, they rely on the stars. The stars tell them which direction this is and which direction that. And for the astronomers, it tells them which day. It talks about days and weeks and years and eclipses and all these things. And they are fixed in time, and you can rely on them. It's amazing.
Well, to the point where, you think of the science involved in, we hear about these missions to Mars, the satellites we send out.
Exactly.
And to pinpoint, sending people to the moon.
Yeah.
Just the math involved, the accuracy depends on the reliability of the heavens. And they can, I'm stealing your thunder a little bit perhaps, but you can look back and just by math, I won't say basic math, but math, you can say this is where the stars were at this date thousands of years ago.
It's amazing.
You can calculate all of that.
Isn't it amazing how God has allowed man the knowledge of this sort of way to navigate through time and through, like GPSs they all count on it. When they launch a satellite, they know where the gravitational pulls of everything are and how fast it has to go and where exactly away from the Earth it has to.
Yeah,
and it's fixed.
It's amazing. And
well, our satellites aren't quite as fixed as the stars,
right,
because they have to be adjusted sometimes.
Yes.
But not much.
But they can still pinpoint. And I'm interested in this in part because my brother, Anthony, worked with JPL.
Oh.
So with NASA and whatnot. And so I've always had an interest via him in the heavens, and I love the science of space.
Yeah, so you're an astronomer, amateur astronomer.
At heart.
Yeah. So with these fixed bodies, heavenly bodies, like a star, there's a certain star that when it crosses a certain exact position, there's a crosshair on a computer inside the Naval Observatory, and when it hits it, it clicks to the millionth of a second, and at that moment, it synchronizes time. And your iPhone, if it's off by a second or two or whatever it is off, it's recalibrated by the Naval Observatory. So here we got the Naval Observatory. So we have inside there working astronomers that are chronologists, specialists in chronology, and they know time. So this question about losing track of time has come up again and again. So one day, somebody asked the Naval Observatory director, because of questions coming in. And that somebody happens to be, maybe some of our viewers know who F.D. Nichols, Francis Nichols, editor of the Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary. So he's getting questions like this. So he decided, I know what I'll do. I'll ask Dr. James Robertson, who is the Naval Observatory director. I'll just ask him about losing track of weekly cycles. And so he asked the question, the exact question that we're discussing here. And he got an answer back, and we have the letter. We actually have the letter that comes up in our studies. We can show you the letter from the chronologist specialists. So in summary, Dr. Robertson's statement is this. The specialists in chronology tell us that the weekly cycle, that's what's in question, the weekly cycle has not been broken or altered by any calendar changes. Today's weekly cycle corresponds precisely with the weekly cycle of Jesus' time, because he knew that F.D. Nichols was asking for religious reasons, and before. So Dr. Robertson, he dared to go back to the time of Christ. He called it the Christian era, around the time of Christ. So in other words, the Sabbath that Jesus kept, we talked about that, as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day. That Sabbath day is the exact same sequence of 7 as we celebrate on Saturday today.
And I would assume he had no ulterior motives. He wasn't trying to align his facts with whatever the belief system is. This was his scientific opinion based on the evidence he had.
Well, and the evidence he has, who was he? This is God, right? In the form of man. So it's amazing. And there was no real conflict within Judaism, which was the religion of his time in that area. There's no conflict about, some people on Judaism go to church on Sunday or Friday or whatever.
Right. It's just, this was what it was.
There were Sunday observers, those were called pagans. And that was the world majority. Rome, for instance. There's the Roman religion of state was paganism, which is sun worship. They have a holy day, it's Sunday. So here we have Dr. James Robertson answering the question, and then we show that there are calendar changes. Well, did the calendar changes affect the weekly cycle? So you can look back in time. So for instance, when we went from a Julian calendar, Julius Caesar, from his calendar, when we went to the Gregorian calendar, that was 1582, they noticed that there was 10 extra days. They had to drop 10 days off the calendar to make the annual cycle match with the time they had. So they dropped 10 days off the calendar. Thursday, October 4 was followed by Friday, October 15.
Okay.
So there we have a calendar change, a major calendar change.
But not a day change.
Yeah, so that's what throws people like Charles off, because, there's a calendar change. Well, that right there, it just destroys the weekly cycle. No, it doesn't. If you look, and according to the Naval Observatory and everybody else that studies these things, astronomers, they say that no sequence has been lost. So Thursday the 4th, followed by Friday the 15th. Friday is always followed by Vice versa, yeah.
Right,
One of them is followed by the other. They go together. The leg bone connected to the knee bone or something like that. But so there you have the first major calendar change, and that's when we get our leap years. Our leap years. Do you know when the leap year is? I always have to remember this, but
no,
it's the election year.
Okay.
The United States election year. So, but back then in 1582, or I think maybe it was 84, but we got our first leap year. And now we have, and maybe people know this, but we have leap seconds too. But just to kind of, because the 7-day week is not exactly kind of perfectly lined up and dividable into the days that we have the rotations of the Earth.
Right.
But
again, those changes don't affect the
they don't affect. In fact,
itself.
In fact, they're complemented by it, because no matter what happens to the dates on the calendar, the week is always Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Every time. It never changes.
So in the time we have left, why is this important? What is our takeaway?
Well, the interesting thing is, when God gave us the 10 Commandments, He used the word remember with this one particular commandment. We have all thou shalt not, but then He says, remember the Sabbath day. And when God told us to remember, He gave us ways that we could remember. See, right now there's a battle. The devil wants us to forget. Whatever God says to do, devil says, no, let's do something different. I don't like God, we're going to do it a different way. And he tries to teach the world that. Well, God said, remember. And I always like to say that God's biddings are His enablings, which means inherent with what God tells us to do is the power to do it. He always provides that. If He says, when He says to a storm, peace be still, what happens? A storm is still. Lazarus, come forth. A dead body comes to life. Inherent with the command of God is the power to perform that command. When He says, remember the Sabbath day, He made it possible for us to do that. He gives us the power to do it. Then He gives us all these evidences so we won't lose track of time, because He was on to the devil. He knew the devil was going to do this to us and try to get us to forget.
Right.
And at the end of time, I believe, and maybe you agree with me, that the Sabbath day will play a major, important role in prophecy.
Yes.
In marshaling God's loyal people into one of two camps, either those that are loyal to God or those that are disloyal. And so, and loyalty is a big deal.
Right.
Yeah. So.
And then we also have these rhythms that show that living in His plan brings health and vitality in other ways too.
Yeah.
So folks, if we whet your appetite a little bit, we will have information up there for you so you can dive into this further. God has provided us with this blessing called the Sabbath, and He's given us the evidence to show that that has not changed. So keep that in mind as you praise Him and live in His will. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.